You're listening to What She Said on Canada Talks.
And welcome back indeed. I'm Christine Bentley in studio with Sharon Caddy, and joining us now is Anjum Choudhry Nayyar. Have I got that right?
Almost. Anjum Choudhry Nayyar. It's a mouthful.
Okay. Now, you're a publisher,
Yep.
You're a journalist, you're a freelance TV host, you're a mom, but you're also a MASALAMOMMA.
That's right.
So tell us about the whole community.
Well, I mean, I think our community is so vast. We have about 1.6 million South Asians in Canada alone, and that's expected to grow in 2030 to about 4 million. So, and half of those right now are South Asian women. So, I think if you're part of any immigrant community, that meaning you're a first generation Canadian, your parents would have immigrated here, you will have some of the same issues that we talk about on our site. So our community is really engaged. They're empowered women. They're highly motivated, and they're juggling a lot. And I think, for example, if you're from a strong cultural background, like if you're Greek Orthodox, you're Jewish, or you're any of those cultural communities that are so intertwined so closely with family, there are going to be issues about how do you communicate your culture to your kids in a way that's meaningful today and it works with your lifestyle. Really.
Now, when you talk about South Asian culture, for people that are kind of maybe yes and no, what countries are we talking about?
We're talking about Nepal, Bengal, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, sort of that South Asian demographic. Mm-hmm. So because South Asia in general is such a vast diaspora,
it's a big area.
You're talking about Punjabis, you're talking about Pakistanis, you're talking about Bengali, Gujarati. There's so many different diasporas. So that's why when I named the site, I wanted to specifically stay away from just saying we're the Indians. Like, we're not just Indian, because really we're not. Quarter of our followers are actually not even South Asian. They're married into the South Asian community, or they've adopted a South Asian child. So we are Masala Mamas because we're spicy, and that means
I love it.
Really, it's open to everybody.
Oh, right? So what? Here you were trucking along, living your life. What were you doing when suddenly you were inspired to do this? Was it a process over time, or was it just one day you just woke up and said, I really need to do this?
Oh yeah, no, I didn't just wake up one day and say it. I don't think I do that with anything. I don't think my brain's that strong. I think what I was very isolated when I became a mom. Even though I was surrounded by all of my relatives, all of my in-laws and my parents and my extended family, despite that, when I first became a mom, I felt really alone. I felt like I couldn't talk to anyone about some of the conversations I was having with my family about things that we needed to do because we were celebrating our first child's first birthday coming up soon. Even at the 7-month mark of pregnancy, my in-laws and my parents were talking to me about, okay, so Diwali's coming up. So you just had a baby 2 months ago, so how are we going to do this? And I was like, I'm nursing and I'm tired and I don't know what's going on. I don't know my head from my butt right now. So I really felt alone, like I couldn't have that conversation with my colleagues because they weren't necessarily from South Asian backgrounds, and a lot of my friends hadn't become married at that point. So over the years, I started to feel like I was part of a community that was having similar discussions. I would come across, the odd mom here and there. I started about 3-4 years ago, started sort of tweeting out, questions about how do you manage this, or how do you manage the stress of an in-law relationship when they have certain expectations culturally, value-wise. Our values are the same when it comes to my husband and mine, but sometimes the way you're brought up is different. And that, like I said, comes up in any household that might be intertwined so closely with that kind of community.
Absolutely.
So I just thought I was a journalist. I was in television for 12 years, and I was able to sort of suss out stories and talk to people and do interviews. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if I could just bring all of my online discussion into a place that would be a platform that supports South Asian communities in this way? And sure enough, I was getting responses from Israel, from Nepal, from Singapore, Australia, and I thought, wow, I really need to sort of make it a little bit bigger than just a little personal diary every day.
Well, I mean, Sharon and I talk all the time, and Kate, about the fact that what most women really value is what we would call the sisterhood. That is a
support
sisterhood,
system.
a support system
Yeah.
of women that we like and care about, or women who are in the same situation, regardless of race, culture, age, whatever, that are going through what you're going through. And you may not take their advice, but you want to hear how they handled it or what they have to say. And then, and also, it makes you not feel alone.
Exactly.
So what you did was you just went out and created your own sisterhood.
I did, and it's
Yay.
funny because they weren't people that I knew
Yay.
in person, but I was so, like, to this day, every day I get responses from women and emails saying thank you for creating this space, but I also thank them because I no longer feel alone. It was a selfish thing to start and to do with my motivation, but I actually can sort of send a direct message or a message to someone and say, hey, I'm really feeling worn out today because I have this coming up. What do you do when you have this happen?
So when did it launch?
So we launched in 2011. I was actually working full time at the time. I did it over my mat leave as far as like planning out how I was going to do it. As you know, when you get bored on your mat leave, you want to do something.
Yeah.
Of course you're bored on your mat
I'm like,
leave.
who gets bored on their mat leave?
Yeah.
But you know, when you're a journalist, you get bored quickly.
Right.
So I started in 2011. I went to a great conference that I met other women entrepreneurs called the Women in Biz Network. And I started sort of planning out, my first 3 months of publication. And I did like 27 stories all on my own. And I plotted out 9 sections of the site.
Well, I actually think mat leave is a perfect time because when I had babies, I found that I was craving adult conversation.
Right.
That's what I wanted. So, 2011. So now here we are 3 years later. And what is your membership?
We have almost, I'd say, 20,000 visitors to the site every month. We do events as well. So I've actually started, my thing was I wanted to make sure I had some of that online conversation in person as well, locally as much as I could. And I also do events across North America when I go to different places. So I do a tweet up because that's where my space is. I launched on Twitter. My tweets are my place. They're my friends. So we've had events that have 50 people. We keep them intimate because that's how moms get to know each other. And our membership is growing every day, and it's really in part also really and thanks to our sponsors because we actually get a lot of support to allow us to grow. And it's allowed me to sort of, bring on writers that I can pay to write, articles, which is really important, and do events, and, maintain the network. And Chevrolet Canada has been part of my story right from day one. And they found me on Twitter.
Oh,
So,
that's amazing.
yeah.
So tell us about the masala part, the spicy part. Because I think I need a little spice in my life, and I'm not South Asian, but maybe I could join.
You should totally join. Trust me, it's a fun space. I think
I have no young children, but
you don't need young children.
Maybe
You know
I
what,
could
Christine? I'm looking at it. There's recipes. That's all I need to see.
Yeah.
There's recipes.
That's right. So we actually do a lot of our biggest space, our biggest popular space is obviously the Bollywood side where all the film stuff gets talked about, but also recipes because for our moms today, a lot of the time is not be in the kitchen and cook all day like the rest of you guys. We don't have time for that. And, our parents and in-laws would have spent hours, making that gravy that becomes part of the curry. And, well, we don't do that. So we find shortcuts. But we also find ways to make fusion cuisine. So we have a lot of recipes. We have a series on sort of a mixed masala, which is basically, South Asian quesadillas, dosa lettuce wraps,
Ooh.
A cardamom spice muffins.
Lunchtime, Sharon.
I know.
Yeah, so cardamom spice muffins, cardamom chai scones. I mean, there's a lot of ways to bring in the South Asian spice without making it completely, the usual traditional stuff. So we mix it up, and that's what it is because our readership is a mixed masala.
So let me ask you some of the top questions or issues that your community wants to talk about or wants to know about.
Well, some of the biggest taboo topics that have originally been taboo in our culture that you wouldn't necessarily talk about over dinner are things like divorce and the concept of the invisible divorce, which is talked about a lot in our site because a lot of our women in the community, even prior to our generation, would have stayed on in a relationship for the sake of honor of the family, for the sake of reputation, for the sake of a sense of fear of failure, because since in general, even all of us women can say, sometimes when you go through a divorce, you feel there's a sense of failure on your part. Well, culturally, it's even worse, because not only do you feel that failure, your entire community that you've been surrounded by will feel like you're a failure. And I think there's a lot of stigma attached to that, and people don't really talk about it. But now our generation is doing a lot more of that, and they're empowered to say, no, we're going to step away from this relationship because it's toxic for whatever reason. Domestic violence is a big one on our site as well. But we also talk about, gender bias and empowering our daughters, because culturally, daughters were the ones that had a back seat in the family. But in this generation, we are empowering our daughters to go out and go and pursue careers that are progressive, that are not just traditional, and go into careers like journalism, like whatever. And we're teaching our kids that they can be just like the sons, and also teaching our sons that they should be able to express emotion. So a lot of our moms are talking about that.
Nice.
You're watching What She Said on YouTube.
We were talking about actually a pretty serious subject, and that is the subject of South Asian women here who maybe are facing the possibility of divorce and trying to empower their daughters to be maybe a little less subservient than the culture might want them to be. And the friction then between in-laws and the rest of the community.
I think, I think our luckily our generation, like I said, we're a lot more empowered, and we're able to sort of speak up most of the time when we want to. And I don't know, I think subservient is like a little bit less now, that sort of concept. Mm-hmm. I think it's more, okay, so how much can we push them so that they are empowered for the next generation. And because I think culturally we are expected to live with our in-laws or to be close to our in-laws. Not everybody does, just for the sake of, some of our in-laws are back in India or Pakistan or wherever. But most of us have a network that we're expected to answer to, sort of, and to be part of. And we're also measured up to that standard. So, for example, I have a sister-in-law who's a lot more traditional than I am, in a good way. She lives with her in-laws. I don't. My in-laws live very close to my home. But I'm open to them, whenever they need to be with us, they need to be with us. Same with my parents. So I think in those circumstances, because she's actually set the bar, so that happens a lot in families too, that your sister-in-law, your brother-in-law would have set the standard for what's accepted on their side, so then that becomes your standard. And then how do you measure up to that? So even within the family, there's also those internal expectations that can play a role. And for women who are raising daughters today, we need to make sure that they are, when they do get married, if and when they get married, they have a voice and they are able to express themselves, and that our sons are then taught to understand that voice too, to say that we're equals, and gender-wise, we are equals.
Because we are all moving into the new world, and we're all moving in together regardless of our cultural background. And for boys, that must be hard too, because you must get pressure from the older generation a little bit to push the boys ahead of the girls. Oh,
absolutely. I mean, even in the slightest ways, I love my in-laws, I love my parents, but if my son is crying for some silly whatever reason, sometimes I've heard things like, boys don't cry, they shouldn't be allowed to cry. Why are you crying? Are you a baby? And it really irks me because that and even my husband is guilty of that. It's kind of ingrained in our culture a little bit to say boys should be stoic and shouldn't be that way, and they should not be free to express emotion in the same way. Whereas girls, if they cry, well, okay, you're crying, it's fine, it's a girl. Or why are you crying like a girl? It's those little things that then play into the larger picture. And I think for me, because I was a woman raised in a family with a boy and a girl, there were double standards in my house. It wasn't emotional. It was my brother was able to stay out longer and do lots more things and be engaged in a mixed co-ed environment, whereas I was always never allowed to be around boys. I wasn't allowed to date. I wasn't allowed to do any of those things, and I wasn't allowed to stay out as late as my brother was at the same
Now,
age.
what
So that became a challenge, and today it still is.
Okay, but what's the thought about marrying outside the culture?
Oh,
it happens a lot.
It's totally normal.
But-
It's totally accepted now.
But if you're first generation and your parents are from the old country, whichever country that is, what is the feeling regarding accepting someone from another culture?
Exactly. So that is probably one of the things that have come up on our site as well. And but for our generation as mothers today, we are a lot less rigid about that particular issue than our parents would have been. So my parents always wanted me to marry someone who was progressive and educated and all of that, but they never said to me, you have to marry an Indian person. And neither did they say it to my brother. So it depends on the family.
Yeah.
Whereas I think in my husband's family, it was a little more expected that my husband would marry someone Indian, would marry someone with the same cultural values and Hindu and Punjabi, and he did happen to be. But
Yeah.
but I mean, there was a lot of friction in that first generation. In my generation, you couldn't date anybody. You would be stigmatized and shunned if you dated someone who was not South Asian.
Right.
And then that becomes an issue for, okay, you've had those children. How do you balance the cultural expectations of
Yeah.
both sides?
Yeah. What about, for example, education? So you have children, family's going to make a sacrifice to send them to university. Is there a push that girl children, be pushed the same way boys are to get a career, to go to university, or is there a little bit sort of, no, you probably get married and have kids?
So there's a bit of both.
And that's not just from
Culturally,
your
it's across the board.
It's
Yeah, it
across
is.
the
It's
board
across the board.
in many cultures.
Which is what I was trying to say. And I think, and that's what it is. Whether you come from that background, whatever cultural background, you are going to have that. In our generation, yes, I was part of a group of women whose parents, I remember distinctly saying, oh, just finish your bachelor's degree and then you'll get married, so it doesn't really matter what you do afterwards. But in my family, my dad was very particular about pushing me to do beyond and to go beyond, not just, oh no, you're not going to college, you're going to university. And you're not just going to university, you're going to go get your master's. You're going to at least get your master's. And so it depends on the family, I think.
Yes.
And in my family, my dad was very rigid about this. He was very much a pro-education. Whether you're a girl or boy, you're going out there and you're going to do what you got to do, and you're going to be able to do just what the boys do, not just, okay, you're a female, so you stay beyond that. My parents were not like that. So I was lucky.
You were lucky. Well, this sounds like a fabulous, absolutely fabulous online magazine. Where can people go to join in the conversation?
They can see us on Twitter at MASALAMOMMAs, on Facebook at MASALAMOMMAs, but online at www.masalamommas.com, and we're internationally read over 20 countries now.
Beautiful.
That's amazing. Best of luck, and I think I might just have to join.
And check out the recipes.
And check out the recipes, yeah.
Click the channel subscribe button for full-length interviews and more from What She Said here on YouTube.